What is up, everyone? Welcome into another edition of our NBA DFS DraftKings Picks videos. This time for December 31st. It will be Friday. There are two different slates. There's a 2-game slate, I believe, earlier in the day, followed by a 7-game slate with one game kind of sandwiched in between that isn't on the slate. I believe that's Dallas-Sacramento. This will cover the 7-game slate. I am fresh off the NFL podcast that literally just dropped. If you haven't checked it out yet, go check that out right after this video. I was joined by Ben and Matt. Fantastic podcast. We covered a lot of stuff. There's a lot of different ways to go in NFL this season, or I guess this week. Not this season. The season's almost over, but this week. This is the NBA podcast, though. So prior to us getting into anything, if you do enjoy this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and you can turn on the notifications so you don't miss any of our videos. You can also comment anything that you want below, ask any questions. I will be in there to answer them throughout the day. Obviously, with NBA and the COVID protocols going kind of crazy at the moment and everything, you'll see in a minute when we go over the injury news. Just a lot changes throughout the day. Guys get ruled out. It's one reason why it's a big advantage to be in our Discord, chatdfs.com, completely free to get into. You can also go to the website, dfskarma.com, where we have all of our articles. There's free, there's premium. You can also pick up a course plays package, which gets you the premium articles, gets you into our premium Discord, gets you our projections, and then obviously gets you our core plays as well. I think it's time to get into the injury news. I mean, there's a ridiculous amount. This could be the last podcast that I do where I outline the injury news. If you would rather me just go over the questionable players or even up to doubtful, let me know in the comments. If you would prefer that I continue to do all of the players, also let me know that. I think that when I return, Sriracha obviously will be taking over the weekend. When I return after that, I probably will only be going over the questionable options if that's what people want. But if you do want me to keep going over everything, go ahead and drop that in the comments so then I know and I can just kind of keep doing it as we move forward. Starting with Miami, I mean, it's just a ridiculous game in terms of players that are out, specifically for Miami. Udonis Haslem, Marcus Garrett, PJ Tucker, Kyle Lowry, Markieff Morris, KZ Okpala, Max Struss, Zylan Cheatham, Gabe Vincent, Dwayne Dedman, Duncan Robinson have all been ruled out. More importantly, I guess, to this particular slate, Jimmy Butler is questionable. On the opposite side, Garrison Matthews, Jayshawn Tate, DeJon Jarreau, and DJ Augustine all out for Houston. Moses Wright, Isaiah Hartenstein, Brandon Boston Jr., Avika Zubac, Jay Scrubb, Nicholas Batum all out for the Clippers. Reggie Jackson is questionable. On the opposite side, Toronto is actually getting a bunch of players back. OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet, Precious Achiuwa, Kem Birch, Scotty Barnes all are expected to play in this game. Justin Champagne, David Johnson, Isaac Bogna, all expected to sit, which really doesn't matter all that much with all of the other guys kind of returning for Toronto. Atlanta is another team just decimated right now. Sharif Cooper, Danilo Gallinari, Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot, Onyeka Okongwu, DeAndre Ayton, DeLone Wright, Bogdan Bogdanovic, John Collins, Malik Ellison, Kevin Huerter, Gorgie Jang, and Jalen Johnson all ruled out for the Hawks. On the opposite side, Chetty Osman, Darius Garland, obviously Ricky Rubio as well. He tore his ACL. They're all out. And then Jarrett Allen is questionable to return in this one for Cleveland. DeJounte Murray continues to miss time for San Antonio, but now Lonnie Walker is also questionable. For Memphis, they're dealing with a few more than that. Dylan Brooks, Zaire Williams, Yves Pon, DeAnthony Melton, Xavier Tillman, John Conchar, Sam Merrill, and Jarrett Culver have all been ruled out, while Santi Aldama is questionable. Wayne Selden, Jericho Sims, Daniel House, Matt Mooney, Julius Randle, Nerlens Noel, all out for the New York Knicks. Evan Fournier is questionable. On the opposite side for Oklahoma City, Poku, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, Trey Mann, Darius Baisley, and Josh Giddey all ruled out. Kenrick Williams and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, both questionable there. McKinley Wright, Karl Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, Chris Silva, Rajon Tucker, all out for Minnesota. Then you have Jared Vanderbilt, Anthony Edwards, and Tarin Prince, who are all questionable. For Utah, Mike Conley's getting a rest day. Eric Pascal's also out, while Joe Ingles is questionable, but Donovan Mitchell will be returning. Then for Portland, you have Trendon Watford, Robert Covington, Yusuf Nurkic, Anthony Simons all out. CJ McCollum still missing time. Cody Zeller also out as well. And then you have Nasir Little is up to probable on this one. Rajon Rondo is out for the Lakers. Trevor Ariza and Avery Bradley are both questionable. Looks like LeBron James will continue to play. They're not going to give him rest days while Anthony Davis is still missing time. So a lot going on. I'm going to break this down position by position. I'm going to try to condense my pool, only give a few options at each position. So if there's someone that you're wondering about, go ahead, drop their name in the comments. I'll let you know what I think about them. There's obviously going to be a lot of players that I don't necessarily get to, that I do feel are fine options on this slate. Starting at point guard, it's tough near the top. Two guys really stick out. One, I want Damian Lillard. I just think that he might be a little bit too expensive. I do really like the matchup against the Lakers, though. The other guy that I'm interested in is Ja Morant, who just is coming off of a 66 fantasy point performance against the Lakers. He gets a plus matchup against San Antonio. I think between the two at the moment, I'm slightly leaning towards Ja Morant. Still a really good matchup. He's 1,300 cheaper. And, at this point, they do come with similar upside because Dame hasn't necessarily been the same as past years. I do think that he's going to be able to get to the rim against the Lakers, and we just saw Ja Morant dominate in that sector. So I think it's a good spot for both of them. That I probably prefer Ja Morant slightly at this point. As you continue down, I think when you get in the 6K range, Jordan Clarkson has to be someone that's on your mind. I know Donovan Mitchell's coming back, and he's obviously going to take over a very large role, but Mike Conley will be out. So Clarkson should get 30-plus minutes for the third straight game. Third straight game. In his last three that he has played, 30-plus in all of them, flash 45 fantasy point upside. He's going to play a big role in the offense. He loves shooting. And even with Donovan Mitchell back, the minutes should be there. And as long as that's the case, he at least can be considered. Does it come with more risk, I will say. Definitely comes with more risk with Donovan Mitchell back, but it's not necessarily, a situation where you're going to have to worry about the role. Like Jordan Clarkson's role doesn't generally change when he's on the floor. Like even if Donovan Mitchell's there, Clarkson's going to have the ball in his hands a decent amount, and he's going to take plenty of shots. So I do think that he's a fine option at the price tag. As you continue down more, Emmanuel quickly played 35 minutes in New York's last game. I could see him getting similar minutes. He's only 4,600, so the upside's there. I think that he's a really good option for under 5K. He hasn't necessarily flashed all that much. I believe 3 games ago it was 40. He dropped against Houston. He played big minutes in that game as well. But prior to that, he's kind of flashed on a per minute basis at times, but hasn't really shown the Emmanuel Quickley that we saw last year, where he really could stack up the stats in a short period of time. With that being said, I do believe he probably gets around 30 minutes. If Evan Fournier's out, you really probably can lock them in for that. And at 4,600, he does make a very solid option. If you're going all the way down to the bottom, I think Kevin Pangos is probably the option. Played 25 minutes, I believe, last night, or around 25 minutes, I should say for sure. Started for Cleveland. I would assume a similar role in this situation. Gets a plus matchup against Atlanta. He only shot 1 of 8 from the field, so he's getting a few shots up. I don't have any issues. The big thing is that he's only 3,500 or well under 4K. So not really going to burn you. It's going to be very difficult for him to burn you, but he does come with quite a bit of upside. And I do think that that's a very viable option. Moving to shooting guard, I don't necessarily know if there's anyone at the top that I want to play. I'm a bit worried about Fred VanVleet coming off of the COVID list. I don't necessarily know if I want to go up to Donovan Mitchell. I think that it's a fine play, but the highest I go is Tyler Hero. Miami is literally without anyone. If Jimmy Butler sits out, it's just going to be Tyler Hero by himself doing literally everything that he can on the floor. In his last game, he posted 45.5 fantasy points, played a lot of point. I would expect that to be the case again tonight. He's only 7,200, gets an elite matchup against the Houston Rockets. Tyler Hero is one of the better options on the entire slate. I feel like it just really makes sense to kind of use him as someone along with other Heat players. And we'll kind of talk about that later on, specifically at center. But it kind of makes sense to start your lineups with him as more or less a focal point that you really want to use. As you continue down, there aren't that many options. I do think once you start getting down to cheaper, Malik Monk is completely fine. He's playing bigger minutes. If his shot's falling, he comes with a ton of upside, or I guess more depends on his aggression level. He shot 67% from the field in his last game, but only took 9 shots, so ended with 15 points. But he does come with, 25 plus real life point ability. Can add a few stats in other categories as well. And then when you go right underneath him, I do think it's completely viable to go someone like Caleb Martin. The Heat just need bodies at this point, so Martin should be locked into bigger minutes. $4,300 price tag. If Jimmy Butler's out, I think it's going to be a pretty easy play. He really kind of took off earlier in the season without Jimmy Butler. And I do think that that'll probably be the case again if Jimmy Butler is forced to sit out. But even if Butler plays, they're going to need him for the minutes. And I do think that he's a very viable option, even with Butler in, which can move to small forward and really gets us started with Jimmy Butler. 65 fantasy points in his last game, triple-double upside. He had 15 assists in that game. Offense will run through him and Hero, assuming that Butler's in. 10,000 is expensive, but the matchup against Houston is about as good as it gets. So I have no issues whatsoever if you want to play Jimmy Butler. As you move down more, the guy that immediately sticks out is Marcus Morris. Big minutes, seeing plenty of shot attempts. The one big thing, I guess, would be if Reggie Jackson returns tonight, that kind of is going to take away a little bit of his value. With that being said, I still think he's a viable option against Toronto. I do much prefer him if Reggie Jackson is out, because then Morris essentially becomes the number one option in the offense. But don't necessarily believe that Jackson has to sit to consider Morris for the price tag. I don't necessarily know what to do at the moment with Cleveland's players. I think that their guys come with enough upside to consider, at least most of them, specifically like Lauri Markkanen. The issue is they just also come with a ton of risk. We saw last night they got blown out. Isaac Okoro, who is a young player that you would assume they just want to get minutes, didn't. He sat down the stretch. Markkanen sat down the stretch. Even Mobley did. It's just a kind of a weird situation, but they do come with upside, especially in a matchup against Atlanta. So the majority of the Cavs options, especially on the wing and the bigs, assuming that Jared Allen is out, can be considered. It's just kind of a more or less a weird spot, because who exactly knows if this game stays competitive? I know Atlanta's dealing with, tons of COVID issues themselves, but 2, if they're going to play down the stretch at all anyway. If you keep going down, though, Kyle Anderson at 5K gets a matchup against his old team in the San Antonio Spurs. Burned a lot of people in his last game, 16 fantasy points in 30 minutes. The big thing for me personally is those 30 minutes. I would anticipate he gets minutes in the high 20s, low 30s again, and really just makes a great option, specifically for the price tag, because Kyle Anderson has been a very good per minute player. So, 5K isn't that difficult of a price tag to beat. You can average essentially 1 fantasy point per minute, which he's beat for the majority of the season. And he'll beat that price tag by a few fantasy points, only needs 25 essentially to hit value. Obviously, with this type of slate, you probably need more for quote unquote value, because there's so many salary relief options, because there's so many good plays. But he could drop 40 in 30 minutes, and at 5K, you would take that all day, right? I think as you get down more, there are, a few options that can be considered. Kindred Williams, if he's starting, I know he's questionable tonight, does make sense. You can go down to someone like Denzel Valentine, who we talked about for Cleveland a little bit. But the lowest that I would probably want to go at the moment would likely be Caleb Martin. We kind of talked about him at shooting guard. He's also small forward eligible. I guess Chundi Brown at 3,600 also makes sense just because he's locked into so many minutes, but I don't necessarily want to go there if I don't have to. At power forward, it all starts at the moment with LeBron James. 69 or more fantasy points in each of his last 3. He's consistently been hitting 60 plus, gets a good matchup against Portland, obviously still no Anthony Davis. So I do think that LeBron James is a great option. As you move down more, you have Evan Mobley and Kevin Love, who haven't necessarily priced themselves out yet. Mobley was a focal point of the offense last night. I would anticipate that continues. The big thing for me is, do I necessarily trust Kevin Love? I don't know. He played decent minutes last night. We kind of saw him. I think that the game before that he played 32. If I knew that he was going to get minutes in the high 20s, low 30s, 6,700 isn't a bad price tag whatsoever for Kevin Love. And he's flashed the ability to hit value at the current price tag in like 20 minutes. It's actually been a pretty incredible thing, the resurgence of Kevin Love. But if I knew he was getting 30 minutes, I'd probably lock him. Not necessarily lock him, but shift him into my cash game pool. He'll probably just be a tournament option for me at the moment, though. And, that's kind of an odd spot, especially with Evan Mobley only 900 more. Keep shifting down a bit more, and there isn't all that much that I necessarily like. I think that a popular pick most likely will be Obi Toppin at 3,900. No Julius Randle. We kind of need to see what the Knicks are opting to do with their lineup. If they start, Obi Toppin can start a power forward. Kevin Knox can start a power forward. Depends what they do. Or even Taj Gibson, I guess, if they wanted to get weird with something like that. But whoever essentially is starting at power forward, they're all way too cheap if they're going to have to play bigger minutes. Obi Toppin will be the guy that I'm hoping for specifically. I do love his upside. He does come with, quite a bit of potential, and obviously he hasn't necessarily hit it at this point. But he is a bit too cheap, and I do believe that he can be used. You're just kind of waiting on the starters at this point. Moving to center, I don't necessarily think you're spending up here. I think there's one guy that's very clear. You're using him in more or less all leagues, and that's Omar Yertson. 36 fantasy points in each of his last 2. He played 30 plus minutes in both of those. Miami doesn't have any bigs at this point. He's going to be locked into 30 plus minutes as long as he doesn't really struggle with fouls, which has been the case, but obviously 32 and 33 minutes in his last 2 games. And, he only had 4 fouls in each of those. So he's proven that he can do it. I think that Yurtseven is, just one of the more mispriced options, especially if he gets more involved in the offense. I don't necessarily know if they're going to do that. I don't think at any point in time, really, they're going to run their offense through him or anything, but he could see a few extra shots and obviously is just an elite rebounder. One other thing that personally I kind of want to look at for this, I guess I'll say that after what I'm looking at here. So Steven Adams at 5,200. 26 minutes in his last game. I expect him to get back to around 30 tonight. He's only 5,200. He's been extremely good on a per minute basis. He's flashed versatility. The big thing is that Jakob Poeltl is obviously a very large center. They're going to need Steven Adams' size. Memphis has already shown that they're comfortable giving him big minutes. So I do think that Steven Adams is one of the better options. Slightly below him, Mitchell Robinson probably locked into 30 plus minutes tonight. Very few players come with his pure upside because of his block potential. Obviously can get double doubles, elite rebounder. So I do think that Mitchell Robinson is one of the better options as well. And then you're kind of sitting and waiting on some of the Minnesota news. Obviously, we know Karl Anthony Towns is out. Jared Vanderbilt is questionable. If he's out, that adds a bit of value to the other guys. So Naz Reid returned and played 12 minutes in his last game. I feel like he most likely finds some more minutes. But then you have Greg Monroe, who's playing 20 to 25 and looking really, really good in terms of fantasy. Same with Nathan Knight, and he's only 3,800. So I think at this point, you probably wait and see who's starting. If Naz Reid's starting at center, Naz Reid's the guy. If Nathan Knight continues to start at center, Nathan Knight's probably the player. I do think that Greg Monroe likely continues to hold value because he's just playing, the 20 to 25 minutes. They probably don't pull that from him until Karl Anthony Towns comes back. With that being said, I also think that Greg Monroe adds a ton of risk there. Just really a situation where I want to know who exactly is starting at center for them. And then kind of once I know that, I'll make my judgment there. Most likely the starter is the guy that I would be most interested in. I kind of feel like they're probably going to go back to Nathan Knight again, but we just kind of have to wait for that information. That about does it, though. Again, it's a pretty condensed pool for this type of slate. So if there's anyone you're wondering about, drop their name in the comments. I'll let you know what I think about them. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. I believe Sriracha will be back on Saturday with another video, but good luck tonight.